The Hemel-en-Aarde Valley is one of South Africa's most enchanting, most serene stretches of wine country, known around the world for particularly its Chardonnay and its Pinot Noir. The references to Burgundy are endless, but it's very much a space in its own right. Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Norman Goodfellows, and welcome to The Guardian, which I wish I'd known about a little earlier. The Guardian is a luxury guest house in a particularly quiet corner of a valley that's already not very loud and noisy, and I've been coming here for years and years and years to the Hemel-en-Aarde. I wish I'd been coming to this particular spot though, because in the past, after a day of wine routing, day of visiting estates, doing some filming, I've always had to head back into Hermanus for the evening. Now I've got somewhere new that's right in the heart of this heaven and earth valley. It's a gorgeous spot. I suspect the water's a little too cold for me to go swimming right now, but already we've spotted a couple of owls and a couple of eagles, a load of squirrels on the way in, and plenty of vineyards. In fact, just the other side of the house to the left of me, you will find Restless River and their vineyards, in particular the Cabernet Sauvignon that sits as an anachronism to the largely Burgundian stretch of vines that run up and down the valley. This is the home of Derek Wilson, who moved down from Umhlanga, swapped the laid-back lifestyle of Durban for what has to be the even more laid-back lifestyle of the Hemel-en-Aarde. I don't have a laid-back evening though, because in about 45 minutes or so, I'll be joining the brothers Newton-Johnson and celebrity chef Pete Goff-Wood for a charity dinner, one that was sold at last year's Dan Really Likes Wine charity auction with Strauss. Winners have selected tonight for their night to be hosted by myself and some rather large bottles of Newton-Johnson, which means at the end of the night, coming back to the comfort of The Guardian is something I am really looking forward to. A little bit later on in the show, I'll be joining Dirk van Zyl at Glenelly, an estate that's seen a little change of late. Dirk has moved over from Saxenburg to fill the fairly substantial shoes of Luco Cunningham, who's moved over to Vergelegen. How is Dirk settling into the estate with its French history, even though it's South African? Well, we find out, and we find out about that French history, celebrated in particular through the Lady May, the Bordeaux blend that has its 2017 vintage now released, and I got to taste that with Dirk at Marble. But before we head down to Stellenbosch, let's stay in the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley and head about 2 or 3 kilometres that way to Hamilton Russell. Emil Ross is the winemaker. He's also delivering some great Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. How does he do it? Let's find out. There's a regular sentiment in the wine industry that winemakers get far too much credit for working hard. None of them really work hard at all, particularly when they only make 2 wines. How can that possibly take up any time at all? Let's find out how true that is with someone who's taken time off from his spearfishing adventures to chat a bit. And Emil, welcome. End of harvest. The smile is on face, but you do look like you've had a busy few weeks.
It's been busy, and I'll back myself up by saying I also make Southern Rights wines and Ashbourne, so I make a bit more than 2. But yeah, it's been the harvest is done for us. Everything's in the cellar. We've got some ferments going, but generally we're in the safe zone now, so that's good. It can rain. It doesn't bother us.
You do make more than just the 2 wines, of course, but these are the ones for which you are best known. And it's been a very solid philosophy. We make amazing Chardonnay, we make amazing Pinot Noir, and that under the Hamilton Russell label is what we are going to make. Why just these 2, and has there been a temptation to expand the Hamilton Russell offering over the years?
I think there's always the temptation to expand. You get journalists and critics excited if there's a reserve or something new in the portfolio, but our philosophy has always been to express the place and the vintage. So these wines come from 52 hectares of soil on the farm, very iron-rich, clay-rich Bockerveld shale soils, and we believe that's these 2 cultivars that give us the best expression of Hamilton Russell year on year.
Which gives you wine that is now known right around the world. Oliver and Anthony are great travellers, and they spread the gospel of this particular wine. And you've built up a reputation not just as a great home of Chardonnay and of Pinot Noir, but also the original home in the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley of both. When you moved here, how exciting was the opportunity, but also how intimidating was it knowing that you were taking up the baton for the home of these two grapes in this part of the world?
I, it was. I'll never forget. My scariest moment was when I had to sign off the first barrel order. It was it was a couple of million, and I just thought, it's one thing to buy the barrels, but if I screw the wine up in them, then it's really a big issue. And I was quite confident from a winemaking point of view. I worked with Godfrey Mocker at Cape Chamonix before, so I was quite excited about Chardonnay and Pinot Noir coming from there. I had big boots to fill. Hannes Storm has been around the block a few times, so he it was a quite a serious winemaker to take over from. But I think with Anthony and Olive being so involved in the property, and Johan, the viticulturist, being here for many years already, it was quite a smooth transition in that sense, where I didn't have to recreate the wheel. My only real brief was to tweak certain aspects slightly, and I think the terroir always speaks louder than the winemaker here, which is fantastic. If you have a vertical, we've recently had a vertical of the Chardonnays, and that's from Peter Finlays and Kevin Grant, Hannes Storm, all the way through. There's a genetic thread in the wines that really comes through stronger than any of the winemaking influence, which is it makes it a bit easier as a winemaker.
You mentioned Hannes there, you mentioned Peter, you mentioned Kevin. Every time I come to this valley, there's a real warmth and sense of camaraderie to the people here. So beyond just having Olive and Anthony on tap, I'm sure when you did kick off, Hannes was always a call away, and there are other winemakers in this area who it's quite easy to tap into their experience and ask for a bit of help.
Yes, I think we've got an incredibly tight-knit bunch, amongst the winemakers and viticulturists. And even owners. I think there's other areas in the country where there's less of a good vibe between everyone. But so yeah, it was easy. I mean, I could call Hannes. He basically left me with a cellar that he'd never worked in. They just redid the cellar and he left. So I couldn't call him from that point of view. But it was nice to have him and Johan and Anthony just to chat about certain vineyards and everything. And then also, my first vintage was 2015, which didn't really give me a chance to think too much. I think we completed the entire harvest for Hamilton Russell, Southern Rye, and Ashbourne in just over 3 weeks, which is half the time we usually
Record
get.
time. Yeah. Well, let's have a look at this particular Chardonnay, and the fact that this is the original home of Hemel-en-Aarde Chardonnay, that you've been making it here for so long, and that it is known so well around the world, means there's a certain expectation every vintage, certainly of quality, but also to a degree to style. So to what extent are you as a winemaker attempting to nudge the wine into the style that is perhaps expected, and how much are you just letting each vintage tell its own story?
Look, I want to let each vintage tell its story. Obviously, only the pretty parts of it. You want to get some of the character of the vintage in, but and for us, and especially with the Chardonnay, it's quite simple. We since 2019 we've been whole bunch pressing everything, so then we get quite a cloudy juice, but with the right sort of type of solids in the juice, so we can settle overnight and then go to barrel. The biggest choice is probably which barrels to use, but we've even narrowed that down to only one cooper and one toasting for the Chardonnay. So it's actually, more and more we're trying to create a scenario where we're just really guiding the wine safely through its paces and into bottle to show the vintage. We generally get with Chardonnay very nice pear fruit and citrus. We tend not to be too tropical, and that's simply climate and terroir. So it can be challenging. The biggest challenge is finding enough good Chardonnay on the farm to supply the market. There's massive demand for it, fortunately, and we get funny looks from importers and suppliers if we don't give them their allocation. So yeah.
The allocation of 2022 is of a wine that's had some mixed feedback from the vintage so far from different parts of South Africa. Chatting to Butch Alheit recently, he was adamant it's a slightly underwhelming vintage. I think he was just being a bit morose on the morning I bumped into him. 2022, I think from talking to you beforehand, started off perhaps a little unsteadily, but it seems to have found its feet a little more as a vintage.
I always say I get harvest bomb shock. So 2022, we had a lot of weird things happen in the cellar. You know, presses with load shedding and stuff. Presses getting confused about what they need to do, and a few pumps breaking and stuff. But as a vintage, it was challenging in the sense that it didn't follow the normal pattern, ripening pattern, as you know previous 10 vintages did. So you'd find vineyards ripening before others, where they typically only be 2 weeks after another one, and that was the biggest challenge for me in 2022. But luckily, because you know it's all fruit from the farm, I'm fortunate enough to stay on the farm, so I don't really have that excuse of, oh, I couldn't go and check. So I just had to be in the vineyards more to and pick certain parcels differently to what we normally would. But definitely a vintage that surprised me. You know, we do have a very different climate here than we do in Stellenbosch. Last week, Tuesday, I was in Stellenbosch. It was about like it is now, 30 degrees and sunny, and it was raining in Hermanus. So it's, you know, you can't take a broad brush and say 22 vintage was the same for us as it was for Stellenbosch or Wellington or wherever. Even within the Hemel-en-Aarde, there's quite a difference from us up to the upper and the ridge. I'm happy with 22. It was challenging, but the challenges were more mechanical than they were quality driven.
All right. What about the Pinot Noir? Let's move over to that. The other half of the Hamilton Russell offering. 2022 there as a vintage. Was this a little more sure-footed from the start?
I love this vintage. It's twofold. The fruit quality was exceptional. We've got some really nice younger blocks coming into sort of nice production now, to complement the slightly older ones. And from a winemaking point of view, I've just become more confident with making the Pinot Noir. So this was all natural ferment. It was beautiful, healthy fruit. And we did a few things to just keep the perfume in the wine throughout the élevage process. We used to probably take the wine to barrel with too much lees, and then it became a bit muted, and the wine only showed really well after 5 or 6 or 7 years in bottle. And we wanted to just have a slightly more sort of polished and aromatic wine in its youth. The tannin's still there, everything's still there, but I just find the 22 very nice and aromatic in its youth. So it's, you know, we can't always say, oh, this is the best vintage because it's in the market, but I really like the 22 vintage. I think it's the best that I've been involved in.
There's a lovely little whisper of eucalyptus to this. It's got just a slightly more perfume and fragrance than some of the previous ones I've had, and I'm really enjoying it as a result. One of the results of working here over the past, and we've mentioned Peter Finlayson, we've mentioned Kevin Grant, mentioned Hannah Storm, is that the winemakers tend to leave and go off and make wine somewhere else. And the bad news is that you are doing the same, but the good news for Anthony and Olive is that it just happens to be in Oregon and as part of the same greater project. Tell me a bit about that American adventure.
That's been a great adventure and a great opportunity to do 2 vintages in a year. You know, as winemakers, we only get one chance. But Oregon started in 2018. Anthony and Olive always wanted to do something there, and I managed to source some good fruit through a friend, and we started there renting cellar space. The project's grown. It's still small, but we are growing it each year. And we produce 1 Pinot and 1 Chardonnay there as well from 2 beautiful sites. The Pinot Noir from AVA called Zena Crown or Ayola Amity Hills. And the Chardonnay from a property called Maple Grove, which is not in its own AVA, but it's in the Willamette, and just a spectacular property.
And I'm sure it's a lovely experience getting to make some delightful wine, but can, for either the quality or the beauty of the area, can it quite match up with the Hemel-en-Aarde Valley?
Look, they're completely different. I have to.
Be diplomatic.
No, 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 no. I don't have to be diplomatic. I can, I think there's massive potential in Oregon. Every time I go back, there's better and better wine. As people dial back slightly, I find a lot of the older Oregon vintages were quite, because it's so easy to get fruitiness and sweetness there. I just found a lot of the wines a bit overdone, and people are dialing that back slowly. And with that, you're starting to actually see the terroir differences and stuff, and that's very exciting for Oregon. There's a big push towards more Chardonnay as well. It used to be Pinot and Pinot Gris. A lot of Chardonnay planting happening, and that is super exciting. I think it's a fantastic terroir for both Pinot and Chardonnay there. But there, I have to fight to not get too much fruit there, where in the Hemel-en-Aarde we almost have to work a bit more careful to actually promote a bit of fruit and perfume, where there it's just in excess.
Different challenges, different
American.
wine, and yeah, I think the next tasting we'll need to do then is to set up some of your Oregon wine against some of the Hemel-en-Aarde and
might be lucky
see
with
how
lunch.
they shape up. All right, well, thank you. It's always an absolute delight both drinking the wine and hanging out in such a beautiful part of the winemaking world. Cheers. And doing so in some pretty good company.
Thanks for coming. Cheers.
There we go. Emil Ross, the latest in a line of distinguished winemakers, having a great deal of fun and putting some great South African Chardonnay and Pinot Noir on the world map. I could sit and look at this view for hours and hours and hours. This is a little treasure in the Hemel-en-Aarde. So too, of course, is Hamilton Russell, and a very well-established one. And thanks to Emil for taking us through some of his wine and the potential of that Chardonnay and that Pinot Noir to age and age and age and turn into something that starts as magical but gets even more so with time. And it is one of the states you can visit if you can tear yourself away from the Guardian, because you are so close to Ataraxia, Kevin Grant, and his mastery of Chardonnay. When Kevin talks about Chardonnay, it is poetry. He has it in his DNA, and I love hearing him speak about the grape and how it involves. Right next door to them, you've got JC and Caroline at Creation, where much like Restless River next door with the Cabernet Sauvignon on top of the Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, JC doing all sorts of wine that run alongside the Chardonnay and the Pinot Noir, especially the art of each, which he makes with such success. You go a little further down, the Hasher family vineyards are a fairly recent addition, formerly Sumerage. Hannah Storm is in the area, either making wine or brying, or sometimes doing both at the same time, and a lovely character. You've got Beauchard Finlayson, another one of the grand icons of wine in the valley. La Vierge is not too far away either. Just this complete stretch of world-class wine producers in, as you can see, such a glorious stretch. The name Hemel-en-Aarde makes an awful lot of sense once you've spent some time somewhere like this. And it is a terrific base. It's a compact little cottage. Not really that compact, though. There is a fair amount of space to it. You've got 2 bedrooms upstairs. So do I bring the kids next time, or just me and Mrs. Nicol for a romantic weekend away in the valley? There's a full kitchen if you need it. There's a bright area as well. The pool you saw a little earlier. And then there's here, just sitting down, good book, glass of wine, and check out what lies in front. I think that might be me for the next couple of hours before I get dragged off to the Newton-Johnson soiree for charity a little later on this evening. Speaking of soirees, we had one of Assorted Marble Restaurant a few weeks back. Dirk van Zyl, the new winemaker at Glenelly, was up in the big smoke for a couple of days to present the 2017 Lady May, the Bordeaux blend that honours the grande dame of wine, who said goodbye to France and came to South Africa quite late in life to create a wonderful chapter in the Stellenbosch wine story. Dirk didn't just present his wine, he also told me a bit about the challenge of changing quite suddenly from one wine estate to another and finding his feet and beginning to bring in new harvests and new vintages. It's a fascinating conversation. Here it is. Well, no prizes for guessing where we are. If you've ever watched Dan Really Likes Wine before, you'll know that this is one of the private dining rooms at Marble, and it is a place where I spend a lot of time hanging out with cool winemakers and sampling their wine, which is exactly what we're doing today with somebody who's, well, he's still fairly early in his current job. Dirk, lovely to see you.
Yeah,
And,
cheers. Great to be here, Dan.
And I'm really excited to find out how the journey is going, because it's not that long that you have
No.
been in residence at Glenelly. How's it been so far?
Fantastic. I mean, if you've ever been to the farm, it's a horrible looking place and it's terrible working there. No, it's been wonderful. It's incredible to, what I've always admired about Glenelly. There's always been, since Madame bought the property in 2003, so it's now 20 years, there's always been a single-minded focus, and that's the wine we have on the table today is that single-minded focus. And it's great to step into a company where, that has come to fruition, and we're at a point where the vineyards, the team understands the vineyards, the team in the winery understands everything. So it makes, my life a whole lot easier. Luke has done a fantastic job building the brand up. I think establishing the wine, establishing Lady May. And so it's really incredible. It makes, it really is for me just to step into it. So I'm quite lucky.
There is an ebb and flow to winemakers across South Africa and indeed around the world.
Yeah.
You'll do a certain number of vintages here, some there. Some people stay for longer than others. You were in a place where I'm sure you were having a great deal of fun. You were making some lovely wine at Taxenberg. What was it that said to you, this is a move I'd like to make?
Well, it's, I think as a winemaker, you've got one or two properties in your mind where you like, which you almost aspire to. I was at a tasting when I was working at the Morganton with Carl van der Merwe. I was at his Cape Winemakers Guild tasting, which is a vertical of Chateau Pichon, and I sat across the table from Madame, and she was presenting six vintages of Pichon. And it was just one of the most inspiring wine moments of my life. The way she spoke about wine, it opened my eyes to some extent. And so since then, and the opportunity came up, and I remember I saw the ad and I sent it to my wife, and I was like, this is the worst timing. Like it's like I'm just getting stuck into. We were just about to release my first vintages at Saxenberg. They were doing, I was quite excited about the journey there. We were starting to see the results, and it was really exciting. So it was terrible timing. But in life, you can't just always wait for everything to happen at great timing. And so it was one of those opportunities that I had to grab. And so far it's been an incredible journey. We're into harvest, which is, you always hope for a good harvest. The first one, I still think it can be a good one, but it's certainly a very interesting one. It's been a wild ride, 2023.
You have moved into a property that is headlined by Madame, as you say. For some people, who's this Madame you're speaking of? She, of course, relates directly to the name on the label. Tell us a little bit about Lady May and why her story is so compelling for you as a young winemaker.
So Madame May de Lancaisson hails from Bordeaux. She grew up in Bordeaux. Her dad owned a few chateaux, and in the 70s she took over Chateau Pichon, Longueville Comtesse de Lalande, Pichon Lalande for short, and really, I think she took it over when she was in her 50s, went to go study winemaking in her 50s because she took it so seriously. And I think she revolutionized Bordeaux to some extent. And she's, I think Bordeaux has a lot to thank to Madame for where they are today. And in 2003, she bought Glenelly. Glenelly was a fruit farm, and it's incredible, she's turning 98 in May this year, and she's just flew into the property. She flew to Glenelly on last Sunday night. So I had the privilege of sitting with her for a couple of hours this past week. And she said, she was 78 when she purchased Glenelly. She was looking for a small farm for something 20, maybe 30 hectares. She's like, I didn't want a big project. I was supposed to be retired. And then she walked onto Glenelly, and she said she was just inspired. The slopes and the aspects and the soils were just, she said it just felt right. And that's how Glenelly came to be. So that she's very much still the driving force behind the brand, keeps us all on our toes and in check. But such an inspiration to have there.
That's fantastic. A 98-year-old leading the property. And by all accounts, I've never had the chance to meet her, but I had lunch with Michael Fridjon last week. He was telling me how she might be 98 by number. She's certainly not 98 by life.
Not at all. No, not at all. But it's incredible when you sit with her and how fantastic her memory is. And she'll tell you stories of the Second World War in Bordeaux, and you know, and it's just so inspirational the way she thinks about wine. I'm very fortunate that Nick, who I work with, is her grandson, took over as CEO at the end of 2019. And I think what sets Glenelly apart to some extent from a lot of properties that have foreign owners is when Nick took over as CEO, he moved to the country permanently. He moved his wife and 3 kids to the country. They're going to school in South Africa. So I think it just speaks so much to the intent that they have and the belief they have in Glenelly in continuing, you know, the more than 250 years of wine heritage that they have as a family.
Which leads us to the bottle we have in front of us. Now, 2017, that is 6 years. You guys certainly haven't rushed into delivering this from a vintage that has really rewarded a bit of time, because it started generally 2017 Stellenbosch Reds. It started quite quietly. Nobody noticed it too much. And just bit by bit, it started to get under our skin and make itself felt.
No, definitely. You know, I think Glenelly is from the start, you know, I think with our link to Bordeaux, it's always a non-negotiable that the wine must be age-worthy, you know. And it's always tricky as a property, especially when you're a new property, to wait 6 years or a relatively new property, to wait 6 years before you release one. And I think we're probably one of the last properties to be releasing 2017. But I think, you know, our wines are made in a very classical style, and they need time to evolve. They need time to get into that drinking window. And I think, you know, we all know most wines are drunk within a few minutes of being purchased. So it would be a waste on these wines. It really would be. It would break our hearts almost to see them drunk, you know, 2 years from vintage or 3 years from vintage. So that's why we always wait a little bit longer before we release. And 2017, you know, I think it's been I always joke that the only bad thing about 2017 is that it was only 2 years after 15, and everyone went on about 15 and how wonderful 15 is. And 15s are surely fantastic, but the 17 is incredible. There's a level of precision in this wine and in the vintage, I think, in general, that really astounds me. And there's an effortlessness about the wine, which I think is fantastic. We're tasting the 15 and 17 a little bit later next to each other, and that's always makes for such an interesting comparison.
Let's try this. What we're drinking is 90% Cabernet Sauvignon, 6% Cabernet Franc, 4% Petit Verdot. So you could sell this in terms of South African laws just a Cabernet Sauvignon.
Yes.
But very clearly there are these added little splashes of delight that just complete the full picture.
Definitely. I think that the mindset for us at Glenelly, it's not about being specific on the quantities of cultivars that we use, or we're not bound by, you know, what the blend should be. It's for us, Lady May must always be a representation of the farm and of the vintage. And it must always be the best that we can get out of the farm and the vintage.
The only thing I would say about this, other than that it's absolutely delicious, is that on a blind tasting, I'm not sure I would have gone anywhere near as far back as 2017. There is still such a youthful feel to it, which is clearly in keeping with the philosophy of how you're making these wines. Yes, we can release them now, but don't rush to drink them immediately.
No, definitely. I think for us, you know, it's the holy grail for me on Lady May is where we always want that power of tannin. There must be tannin. You know, if you want to have a wine that you can put away for 20, 30 years, which is truly what we envision with this wine, there has to be tannin. There has to be, but that has to be, if you can get that coupled with a beautiful, elegant tannin, those finely, densely packed tannins, you know, which makes this wine actually quite approachable for a wine of this stature at this age. But it's all there, and I think, you know, there's been a lot of effort put into viticultural management, getting the fruit ripe, but still to maintain that fruit integrity. We're really chasing fruit purity on these wines, and that's, I think, what sets this apart. There's, you know, it's such fresh fruit. It's not, you don't see any of that jammy or developed character which will go south quite quickly. It's really the purity of fruit is fantastic, I think.
Which leads me to inquire as to another wine, one which is just been picked, just coming through harvest. Is it 2029 when you and I will be sharing the release of your first fully crafted start to finish Lady May?
Probably between 2028 and 2029, yes. It's still I joke, I maybe shouldn't say this on camera, but I joke that I've got about 5 years before they realize I can't make wine. Hopefully that's not the case. But No, yeah, but you know, that's the wonderful thing about wine. It's a journey. Um, what you don't, I think, as a young winemaker, what you don't immediately realize is how long that feedback loop is on making wine. If you make a mistake this vintage, you bottle it only 2 years later, so you live with that mistake for 2 years. And then if you release it only 5 years after that, it's another 5 years that you that you live with that mistake. So you try and make as few mistakes as possible. But no, it's exciting. And that, as I said, 2023 vintage has been, so far, we haven't picked any Cabernet. We've finished our Merlot, we've finished our Cabernet Franc. And what is in the cellar so far is looking spectacular. But I've completely given up on doing sugar samples this year because it's just all over the show and there's no rhyme or reason to it. So Jerome and I, so Jerome was Luke's assistant from the start. He's been promoted to winemaker. And he's integral to what we do. And so Jerome and I would go into the vineyards every single morning and go and taste. And with this year is really a vintage where you just have to do it on taste and on gut feel, and hope you don't miss it.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll diarise 2029 for you to sit down with you, 2029, and see how it's going. But by that stage, we'll also be in a space where I think this 2017 already fine is going to be something majestic. And it's another wonderful chapter in this story of a remarkable 98-year-old French woman celebrated on the label who, one imagines, is only just getting started with her Stellenbosch story. It really is doing a bit more research into the story of Lady May. If you're interested in wine and wine history, she's a remarkable woman, not just the 2 decades and more that she's been in South Africa, but also before that in Bordeaux and everything she has been through. An exceptional woman who just recently decided to jump on a plane, come to South Africa. I'm going on holiday to the Western Cape at the age of 98. So inspiring and aptly celebrated with that Lady May, which as a Bordeaux-inspired style of red pays homage not just to her roots but to her current home here in South Africa. We haven't seen yet the wine of Dirk van Zyl at Glenelly. It's going to take a good 4 or 5 years until that is in bottle, but you can see how excited he is about this new journey and about what lies ahead for him at his new home in Stellenbosch. That wraps us up for the week, and I need to go and get ready because it's a night with Pete Goff-Wood, celebrity chef, former MasterChef judge and other host of Brewmaster. Bevan Newton-Johnson, always a dapper character. I think Gordon is going to be there, and possibly Nadia, the husband-wife winemaking team at Newton-Johnson, who very generously collated the lot for this evening, which was sold, and we are going to go and celebrate tonight, the proceeds from which were part of a larger amount of money that, amongst others, celebrated the Pinotage Youth Development Academy and the work that the kids are doing there, and we're very proud to be able to support that. So I'm going to jump into the Guardian, go and sit under a hot shower. The bed looks very inviting. It's been a long day of filming, but I've got a big night ahead. I'm looking forward to it in advance. To Pete, thank you very much, and to the Newton-Johnsons, always very generous. And as I slip away with memories of Glenelly and of Hamilton Russell in mind, I'll shoot forward and look into the future. Here's what's happening later tonight.